Behold, it's Natalia. Let's go find some monkeys, shall we?
Would you say sex is like riding a bicycle?
Nothing gets me going like Christmas and wigs. Let's check out this show.
I remember the first creature I beheld. He was a squirrel. His name was Kevin.
I heard you need a DNA sample.
I want to find light and joy in things that bring us together and unite us. And I think science is something that can unite us. Ow. God damn.
There's a world out there, a world that needs to be beheld.
Oh my goodness. Behold, and welcome back to another episode of Survival of the Filthiest. I'm your host, Natalia Reagan. I'm a biological anthropologist and comedian, and I created this show because what the futz is happening in this country? I mean, folks, we have a war on science, healthcare, people of color, gays, bays, jetways, veterans, queers, engineers, the vax, paperbacks, teachers, creatures, women, the queer community, especially the trans community, non-binary folks, and now DEI. Oh my goodness. So what better way, in my opinion, to resist than talk to scientists, comedians, educators, and people who are creating some really good trouble to move this country forward rather than 5,876 steps back. And here's a quick reminder, because I always forget this stuff, to please like, subscribe, and comment if you enjoy this, and throw in your questions. I want to hear them. And if you really like the show, you can become a Patreon supporter and help this elaborate production. So today, folks, we're going to be talking about DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives promote accessibility and inclusion in the workplace. Essentially, DEI is anti-discrimination. It levels the playing field, and it brings a sense of belonging to the workplace. I mean, these are all good things, right? DEI actually allows all applicants to get a shot at a job, thus actually promoting meritocracy rather than not promoting meritocracy. But just like the word woke, DEI has been hijacked by the right, misappropriated, misattributed, misidentified, misunderstood, and vilified by the very folks it helps. Now, let me get my little PowerPoint going. First of all, let's see. Wait, there we go. There we go. We got the DEI. I'm just making sure you can see this because this is live performance, folks. Oh, there we go. You can see it. Good. There's the DEI. And what do I mean by who? First of all, DEI is not a bad word. It's like I just said, it's a very much a good word. But let's talk about the folks that actually are benefiting from DEI. Hold on. There we go. It's a lot of people. So who benefits? Well, women, veterans, disabled veterans, old folks, young folks, queer folks, Latinos, Black folks, the indigenous, the mentally and physically disabled, neurospicy folks, depressed and anxious people, Middle Easterners, Christians, Jews, Muslims, atheists, the unhoused, and chronically ill. And this is not everyone. So many people benefit from DEI. And according to a McKinsey study, hold on one second, white women hold nearly 19% of all C-suite positions, while racial and ethnic minority women hold only 4%. So overall, white women have benefited disproportionately from corporate DEI efforts, right? Oh my God. And we'll get to how many people voted for Trump in the last election that were white women. Whew, it makes you mad. But so, as Trump's press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, continues to decry DEI and blame it for anything that goes wrong, she's doing so from a position she would not hold if it wasn't for the fact there is DEI. She is, in fact, a DEI hire. Oh, God, doesn't it make you just want to scream? This is when I want to remind you that 52% of white women that voted in the last election voted against their own interest by voting for Trump and against essentially DEI initiatives. So this is why education and understanding what DEI is so incredibly important. So I'm going to go through the history as quickly as we can because we have a very exciting guest that I cannot wait to give us all the breakdown on DEI. Okay, so the DEI initiatives really find their roots. The Constitution says that everyone's created equal. Well, they didn't really cover everyone because women and people of color were not included. But then you get the civil rights movement, and that was signed into law in 1964. This act prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, laying the foundation for equal opportunities in employment. So this is kind of the beginning of DEI way back when. And then we have, going forward, we got the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Maybe it doesn't deal with employment, but it does still deal with equality and making sure that people have housing. Because let me tell you, it's really hard to hold down a job if you don't have a house. And for a long time here, even in Los Angeles, a lot of people were not allowed to own houses if they were not white men. So this was very important. And this was 1968. And then in the 1970s, we had women really marching in the streets, pushing for the Equality Act of 1974. And this sought to amend that 1964 Civil Rights Act to include the prohibition of discrimination on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, and marital status, because a lot of single women were not given the opportunities that married women were, and it was based on their husband. So essentially, they were given opportunities to hold jobs, have federal assisted programming available, housing sales. You couldn't buy a house as a single woman for a long time, rentals, financing, and brokerage services. So this was a huge step. And then in the 1990s or 80s and 90s, we see a push for those with disabilities. And in 1990, the Americans with Disability Act was enacted, and this prohibits discrimination against individuals with any disabilities in various areas of public life. So this includes employment, housing, and providing accommodations like things like ramps, elevators, and adjustable desks in the workplace. Again, promoting belonging. These are all good things, and let's be real, folks. Disabilities can happen at any point in your life. So if you think that you are immune to that, you're not. So in the 2000s, here's a little bit more ADA. Moving into the 2000s, you start seeing training about talking about biases in the workplace and how can we combat them. So we're seeing sort of a push for being more inclusive. And then there was the Don't Ask, Don't Tell Act that was in 1993. That got repealed in 2010, allowing those that are serving in the military to openly serve if they are part of the queer community. And now with those that are trans being forced to be kicked out of the military, this is a huge backslide in rights, and absolutely, in my opinion, disgusting and deplorable, and we need to do better. So, and then there are those that argue that DEI is at odds with MEI, which is merit, excellence, and intelligence, which I think is absurd because, and I love this quote. This is according to Stephen Chu, the chief legal aid for the administrative officer of the human capital management company InStride. He says, the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion have been overly politicized, but in actuality, the goal of constructing a workplace based on merit, excellence, and intelligence requires a thoughtful approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Merit without opportunity is an illusion. And I wholeheartedly believe that. Now, today, I'm very excited to have on a friend and also a DEI consultant and specialist. Erin-Kate Escobar has a master's of education, has an extensive track record of more than a decade dedicated to advancing social justice and education. Their expertise lies in conflict transformation facilitation, nonviolent communication, mentorship, deconstructing and understanding bias, identity exploration, and transformative leadership. With lifelong experience and 10 years of work in diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility, Erin-Kate has spearheaded a spectrum of endeavors encompassing leadership, outreach, policy development, and programming to drive equity initiatives in small businesses and organizations. With experience in higher education, nonprofits, startups, small companies, museums, and STEM. And in other words, you should hire EK. So please do. So people of the internet, please welcome the amazing Erin-Kate Escobar to the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. What a delight.
You are amazing. And I cannot wait to hear about all the work that you do to push this country forward. So we're friends outside of this world. And when I found out that you did this, I was just so excited. But I got to ask, tell me about your story. How did you find yourself working in the DEI space?
Yeah, it's a really great question because there's no one pathway to get here. Every person you talk to in DEI, it was a different story. For me, it's been a journey. I always wanted to make positive change in this world, and I've tried to figure out how. And growing up, I thought maybe that's to be a politician, and I studied politics, and I went to DC, and I worked for Gavin Newsom when he was when he was mayor of San Francisco, and I was
Oh,
like,
wow.
politics is where it's at. This is how we make change. Look at all those laws you just listed. Like, those get made by legislation. And after 4 years of study and experience, I was like, they are not ready for queer people of color there. Wow, this is a very uncomfortable experience.
Oh, man.
Um, so then I was like, I'll pick something easier. I think like conflict transformation could be good. I'm Jewish. This conflict, what we used to call conflict of the Palestinian Israeli conflict, we really need to solve this. So I was like, I'm going to learn Arabic. I'm going to move to the Middle East, and I'm going to be a part of solving the Palestinian Israeli now genocide happening. Um, and I did that after college. I moved there, and clearly I haven't solved the conflict. Clearly it has
Yet,
escalated.
the day is young.
Yeah,
We need you
exactly.
there on the ground. Wow.
Conflict transformation at its heart of like, how did we get to this place? And being with
Yeah.
Jews and Palestinians and building bridges and thinking about like, how did we educate our population so differently to just believe lies, right? Or believe one way of thinking as what is actually happening. And right, it's so much more complex. It's ethno, national, religious, and political conflict. That has to do with a lot of money and power. So conflict transformation really spoke to me. But while I was spending time in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, I was like, I just feel like a giant colonist here. Like, I have a lot of ideas, and it's not my place to impart my ideas on you, because here I am, just an outsider coming to be like, I think here's a cool idea, So I was like, oh, I gotta go home and do this work where like my cool ideas are like, I have the cultural capital. I have grown up in this country, and I can still play that role in saying, you know, I want to help us make change. I want to help us notice what's happening. So I went back to school to study human development. Like, how do we think, and how do we grow, and how do our minds become what they are, as an adult, as if that's the end of our learning. I'm
Oh,
like, there's
God.
this, like,
Yeah.
there's a whole
If
more to do
only.
on that. So, how do our brains make sense of who we are and who we want to be? And that led me to working on college campuses, like in cross cultural centers, women's centers, LGBTQ centers. Um, and I loved that work. And yet 2020 happened, and they were working us to the bone. There was no pay raise in sight. There was just like, do more, make more. We're not going to listen to anything you have to say, even though we have all the right answers. We're not going to apply them. And I was like, I'm going to go somewhere where people pay me to apply the ideas. I'm going to go consult. So I left higher ed to start my own DEI consulting business, because I was like, people will pay me to implement ideas that we come up with together and make the changes that are going to help make their organizations so much more human centered, so much more holistically better for their staff, for the people who are there. And like, yummy, how juicy to like have
Yes.
2020 was like a moment in time where everything came together and people were hungry for diversity and equity and inclusion. People knew the difference between like, I walked into a lot of places that had like a bad practitioner, practitioners who had executed, their work in not the best way. And so we
Uh,
had this like, how do we heal from like the damage that's been done by past people? How do we deal with conflict in the workplace? So, and then rolling out and saying, I really specialize in working with small businesses, that want to implement that systemic change, that I didn't just want to give workshops, and speak out into the universe nice things, but like that didn't actually make systemic change. So we'll get into systemic change along the way, but that's landed me here as a DEI consultant, where I used to have a few federal government contracts that kept me afloat. And January 21st, my work with the federal government ended. I'm really proud of what we were doing within NASA to to make change, to ask, scientific groups to be, explain to us for their funding, like how they were going to build a more inclusive working group of scientists. So I've been really passionate about working in STEM and thinking about like how do you build an inclusive lab or working group that might very intergenerational across different time zones, with different levels of seniority, and we can still take really simple steps to say, how do we make sure everyone's on the same page here? How are we building a collaborative environment? Yeah, and so just deeply believing in how do we apply that methodology in nonprofits, schools, businesses, across the board. How are we making these environments that are more pleasant to work in?
Right? I mean, like everything that you've said, I mean, it really does speak to, and I've had a lot of conversations, I feel like in the past since I've started the show about belonging, about just feeling like you belong is a huge part. I interviewed a friend that was in Gaza and, and just, people, a whole group of people being wiped off the face of the earth, not feeling like they belong. I talked to, Sex is a Spectrum about, people that didn't feel like they belonged and having to fight to, my friend, I just interviewed her about science education and people feeling like they want to belong in a science space. And you do this, like this is, and you brought up a point that I feel like is so relevant in higher ed, is wanting to have diverse voices in higher ed, to have that sort of, oh, look, we hired somebody, whether we want to call it a trophy, which is a terrible thing, but but they treat it as such because they don't actually listen to the wisdom that you want to impart, to actually use the applications that you've developed, right? Is that how you felt in education, that they weren't really open to listening?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have books and case studies on like what to do when there's a student protest. And you know what? It's not to call the police. Like, number one in decades of studying what to do when your students build an uprising, it's not to call the police. And then again and again, like the first thing an administration does across the United States of America, they're like, what do we do? What do we do? Oh, we called nobody. Everyone's telling us not to call the police, but it's just so easy. There's just 3 buttons.
What? Yeah,
We have
I mean,
all the
do you think
knowledge
it's
to know
yeah.
what to do in this scenario, to listen, to create groups, to build understanding, to help the administration understand what the students are saying, to help students understand, where the administration might be up against a rock and a hard place. And instead we're like, nope, obliterate and ruin everything. Don't
Yeah, might as well
create
just
a
call ICE,
beautiful, yeah, don't create a
right? I'm
beautiful
like,
learning environment, like ruin people's lives.
wow, gosh. I mean, so and that is a great scenario. What would you advise if, say, there was a student uprising? What would EK say to do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, first things first, how do we help people get to a place where they even can listen? Because usually when people are upset and angry, they are upregulated, they want to be heard. How are we creating a space for that to be heard? Where are the campus presidents and trustees and boards who are like, we're here. You can yell it to us, but we'll hear it better if you're not yelling at us, but here, we'll listen to you yell at us. And like, how could we just listen and allow space for people to feel heard? And then what do we do with that knowledge? Like if people were actually listening to each other, there could be room to say, wow, this is complicated. And I mean, there's some real pieces in there around like how a university works. It is education, but there's a business aspect to it. So like, how are we challenging this model that we're in where like our university has to have enough money to pay for this campus and every person who works on it, and provide you with an education that is, as high as we can get, and like what does divestment look like, and how there are universities who are finding ways to like build that bridge of like, here's what we can't divest from, right? We are hearing what it is,
Yeah.
and there's work that could be done, but instead it becomes like, this bullfight, or this like we're going head to head, and there's a zero sum game of just like destroy students' lives, call the cops, get them arrested, uh, get people taken away and totally dehumanize anyone working at a university and put the administration right at odds with students, which doesn't have to be. So I would work for like listening groups and sessions and making sure people feel heard, and then coming up with those lists of like, what does it look, what are the demands, what do people
Right.
want, where can we, build a bridge to reach some of those, or think about how we're going to make a long-term plan, because none of this DEI work happens overnight, to say, here's how we're working towards these things. And over the next 1, 3, 5, 10 years, how students will experience this differently.
That is, I mean, I don't understand why the first plan of attack is literally bringing in law enforcement to talk to your students that are paying you money to attend there, you know? So when the work that you were doing, I mean, you moved on from higher ed and went into, working for different government agencies, including NASA, which is incredibly impressive. Can I please just like, give you your flowers for that? Because that's amazing, right? And what kind of work were you trying to do with NASA? Because as somebody who works, I work in biological anthropology, a little bit different, but I do know that astrophysics has issues too with misogyny and folks of different persuasions not giving this the same fair shake in the field. So what kind of work were you doing there?
Yeah. So I specifically, as you said, worked with an astrophysics department within NASA to roll out a pilot program for an inclusion plan. And that was essentially like your science HR plan. Like, how do you make sure everyone in your group is equipped with the knowledge they need to be successful? Because I don't know if people know, but behind the scenes, science is messy and human, even though it's very like we're facts based and
Yeah.
there's only we're coming up with the way things are done. And we're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You have 10 people sharing knowledge and like across 8 time zones and 20 different people who contribute knowledge to this. So it's a big, beautiful web of humans working together to come up with manufacturing knowledge, right? And the way we do things. So it was asking people to submit a plan that said, how do we take care of the team who's working on this scientific project to send this out into a space, or to work on, studying this particular aspect. And it wasn't, it was like non-evaluative in their quest for money. So at this point, it was
Mhm.
really just a pilot to say, help people learn. Like, what is it that, what are 5 simple steps you could do to create greater inclusion in your working group? As the PI, like, how do you incorporate feedback? Is there a place that people could give feedback? Uh, do you have an example of a time someone's given you feedback and that's made a change for your group? Awesome. You're already doing it. You're like, in
Yeah.
some ways, it was helping people like put language and words to what strong leaders already like having one-on-ones, making room for dissent. There's, more than one right way of doing something, mentoring, making sure people have somebody they can go to outside of just the most powerful person in the group to get answers, or to complain or to face a challenge, and then figuring out like, where do we go from there? It's, as a boss, you have to deal with conflict. So, like, what are your conflict management skills in your group? How do you deal with that instead of just pretending like conflict doesn't happen? Not here. It
Right. Don't
happens.
call the cops. Don't do that.
Definitely don't call the cops.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, helping roll out an initiative, we were 3.5 years into rolling out these inclusion plans. So, educating scientists both how to write them, educating, I had like a group of DEI practitioners on how to read them and how to give really effective feedback that actually, when they got their inclusion plan back, like they would feel inspired and had ideas that they could implement, instead of feeling like defeated or like, oh, I'll never get this right. We're like, here's the answers to the test. Like, show us how you might implement them, right?
Yeah.
We're not trying to quiz you on this. These are like, pick one of the 10 things we've maybe recommended or said could work, and like, see how it goes. And it might not go great. Cool. Pick a different one and try that one. They're not everyone's style. And I think that's a really powerful thing about this work, is there's no like, here's, there's a great way to do something, but if it's not your style, like, you got to figure out
Yeah.
your style for your group that you're managing.
It's not one size fits all. It's very much a sort of a catered to well curated process. Now, you said you were 3.5 years into a project with NASA. And then I'm assuming on January 21st, that went away. How many years was it left in the project, or was it sort of an open-ended affair?
Definitely open-ended. It didn't have a cap on it. It was like, great, we're going to keep going. And someday this will be a part of your evaluation. And someday we'll be stopping in to check in and like hear how it's going and share success cases and watch STEM like become this environment where anyone can flourish, right? We can see that happening in front of our faces over time. Um, yeah, and there's no timeline on how long that takes to happen. For some groups, one piece of feedback solved, and for others, it's gonna be some time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and it's one of those things where I feel like if you don't consistently, it's kind of like complacency is the biggest enemy. If we just think, oh, we made some progress, we can let it go. That's when things like this happen, right? Like we had so many steps forward, and now it feels like 5,000 steps back in the past 4 or 5 months. And so, if anything, it's history repeats itself. So hopefully, we've learned our lesson. I mean, it doesn't apply to everyone because a lot of people I think have been pushing forward at all times. But it's kind of like the whole "I'm not a feminist" became a thing. I can't even remember when I was growing up. Like there were like young women that were like, "I'm not a feminist," as if it was a bad word, and not realizing that we're standing on the shoulders of feminists, those women that, were pro-choice and pro having a bank account that wasn't attached to a man. You know what I mean? Like there's so many things that we take for granted. And same with in terms of, diversity, equity and inclusion. It just we can't rest on our laurels. I will say my unfinished sock, hello, my unfinished sock, says, don't call the cops, like and share the stream instead. Please do. And please don't call the cops. I have to hide all my illicit substances, which there's not really anything. It's pretty, my Charles Darwin puppet. I'll have to hide Charles Darwin. But no, have you ever come into a situation where there was pushback, say, from one of the members of a group that didn't maybe understand what exactly the plan was, that maybe thought this was, took it personally because maybe they felt like, this was targeting them because maybe I'm speaking probably specifically about white men, uh, because they would not fall under the diversity, unless they're a veteran or mentally or physically disabled. It might not apply to them. Have you gotten any pushback from people?
Definitely. Plenty of pushback, plenty of people who don't think it applies to them, don't believe in it. And um, oftentimes it's really helpful to sit down and have like space to feel heard. Again, back to that initial piece where like, we're not just gonna, me saying it's important and you saying it doesn't matter. This doesn't get us anywhere. So like,
Call the
let me
cops. Sorry.
understand where you're coming from and like what's feeling really hard and painful here. Like I'm hearing you're really stressed out and you have a lot on your plate. And this feels like one more thing on top of everything else you're carrying. Great. I understand that better. So like let's not make this one thing a heavy thing on your shoulders. Let's figure out how this is a shared responsibility of the group. You as the PI might be a point person for it, but in an ideal world, your whole group is contributing to say like, here's what I need. Here's what I need. I need a flexible schedule so I can tend to my elderly parents. I need to make sure that I have like these 3 holidays off that aren't a part of the Christian calendar that are fall during this deadline. Like how can we navigate this as a group? I need help. Like there's literally not a bathroom in our building I can use. Like I have to travel outside of our building to use a bathroom, like still happening in the
Wow.
2000s. So like let's get some advocacy on this so that like I don't have to leave our building to use a bathroom. So like here are the 5 needs of your team and then be like, great. So how are we going to cover the schedule for when somebody needs to be out? What does flexible working hours look like? Oh, everybody wants that? Cool. Let's figure out how we make flexible work, for everyone. Oh, everyone needs a bathroom? Cool. There's this idea in disability justice work called the curb cut effect, right? So we made curb cuts because of thank goodness for the American Disabilities Act. And we said, these are for people navigating the world in wheels. and
Mhm.
they actually help everyone. So while they were made for, right, like maybe a small percentage of people who navigate the world by wheelchair, anyone who's riding a scooter or a bike or a kid or is temporarily disabled or can't make a step, elderly, young, like everyone benefits from a curb cut, even though it was just created for a small number of people. So the curb cut effect in this world is really like we make a change that helps one group of people, but it actually makes life better for everyone. And that same thing when like we know people want a flexible work schedule. And yeah, it really does help parents and people who are caregivers. But like it makes work so much better for everyone when you're like, oh, I can determine when the start and the end of my day is and like balance my work level, what needs to get done. And yes, there's going to be challenges that come with that, but there's an even bigger challenge that you come with if you're forced to say like, there's no flexibility here. So only people who
Yeah.
can work 60 hours a week during these hours of the day can be hired for this project. So
No, I think that's so I didn't know that the curb cut was yeah, I mean, that makes sense that it benefited so many people that probably wouldn't it wasn't so much of a problem worth speaking up, right? But it's like because it's helping this one tiny percent. I mean, this is a ridiculous example, but no, it's not. It's very important. A couple years ago, a team actually it was a gender affirming care surgeon that finally counted all the nerve fibers on the female clitoris, and they did it this is hilarious because to build a better penis because they were actually doing, gender affirming care. So this is an example of how trans healthcare, actually benefits the whole population because we all should know this. We should know about our anatomy, right? And it's something that, again, I use that example because I really think that diverse voices in science are such a only makes the science better. It's more inclusive. They're going to ask questions that you never got in the past because it didn't really apply to those people maybe asking those questions. But I just love the idea that maybe one group of people can, by speaking up, can benefit so many folks. I love that, and I think, I in a time where I don't know, I wish people could see how it is a meritocracy when you really do take in consideration all the people that are going to be seen for a job. And when you limit that, when you can actually, there's no laws protecting whether or not people can be seen or considered for a job, you really are dismissing some of the brightest and best people out there. And I mean, what are some misconceptions about DEI that you hear that you wish you could just be like, wait a minute, that's not what this is about.
yeah, I think people get really caught up in DEI just being about like politically correct language or just being a language thing. Like if I'm never going to learn all the right words to say, so I give up. Like I'm never going to
Yeah.
get it right. That LGBTQIAP plus like just keeps changing. I'm going to learn it and then it's going to change. And like, I'll never know all the right things to say. I'm always going to mess up. So like people think it's just like a static thing. Like if I just learn the words or if I go to one workshop or like anything in our society, people want like some magical one-time pill that solves the challenge that they're facing. And it's so much more than that. It's like a way of a way of being, it's a way of being curious. It's cultivating a space where you even have the capacity to be curious. Because if you can't find food and you don't have housing,
Mm.
it's hard to be curious about how somebody else is feeling, right? It's a way of being of like, how do we build empathy between not knowing what somebody else is carrying, right? So we're all walking in with like a backpack loaded down with our experiences, our life, our identity, and it's all invisible. Sometimes we can see it and we make judgments about it, but most of the time, we don't know everything that someone's carrying back there. And so, how do we become more relational to get to know people and make it okay for somebody to share with us something that maybe felt too scary to share when we first met, but 6 months into knowing them, they're like, oh, I feel at ease, like I could share something else with you so that we can better understand each other and build more of a connection. And I know that you would actually support me in navigating, like how my ADHD shows up in the workplace and helping me get the resources I need. So we create things like a mental health ERG that, might be really scary for someone to join because it feels like, I just said ERG, but that's an employee resource group
Thank
where
you.
it's like you don't necessarily have to, people are afraid to like out themselves at work for having a disability. Disability is one of these things that is still very stigmatized and is being extra re-stigmatized by our current administration.
Woo.
Instead
Yeah.
of acknowledging like most of us have a disability of some kind. Like if you really dig into it, you're right. Like many of us are navigating the world with some form of disability, and whether or not you have the resources to be at ease while navigating the world with that disability speaks to a lot of different parts of our world in which you have access to, and privilege and power and oppression. Um, but this misconception of maybe like stereotypes that exist, right? Where it's like, here's what
Yeah.
we think about that, and there's only one way to think about it, and just allowing space for things to be so much more complicated than our kind of go-to black and white thinking, which can also be just like trauma brain of like scary things are happening. So I need to make sense of this and it needs to be as easy as possible. So this is bad and this is good. And I have to pick one really fast. um, so yeah, how do we just slow down and like be humans who could interact and care about each other? Like we're not living in late stage capitalism and everything's on fire.
Oh my God, I want to be in your brain right now. I also want I think we all need an EK therapist because you have such an excellent way of talking. No, seriously. I mean, I've talked about this a lot in recent months actually about radical empathy, and you practice this. Cuz I'm sure, there are moments where it's tough where you have to really get as empathetic as you can to people that might sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's hard to see the point of view of somebody else, and it sounds to me like you do such a good job of doing that across the board. Those that are just looking to have more belonging, and those that are being resistant to that because it's like got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or you got to do the 60. If you can't do this, then go find another job. It's there's a way to, I think, deal with folks that have different opinions, and I feel like you have this radical empathy down pat that if I any takeaway from this conversation is just to listen and to like you said, slow down and try to realize that we can get through this. Like you're so hopeful. I love no, I'm kind of blown away. But we also before this show started, we were just talking about what you kind of touched on just now was compartmentalizing and putting things in boxes. And when things are scary to us, we try to see things for very clear cut ways of being when there are shades of gray, right? Like things are not so easily broken down into, this is black or white, right or wrong. There's a lot of different, varying shades of gray. And so how would you explain that to somebody that say, only maybe sees it one way or another? Do you have a kind of a go-to, not a speech, but maybe an example or metaphor?
For someone who's kind of like trapped in their own thought process, like black and white thinking, like I was just
Yeah, they
saying.
might be their own worst enemy. And if you don't, that's okay. I feel like you've got it no matter what.
I mean, ah, sometimes the best case scenario is actually to leave that person alone in that moment. Because if they're really
Yeah.
in a place of like, I can only see this as this or this, and you've said aloud, like, I think it's more complex. Like, are you willing to be open to a different perspective that I share? And they're like, no. I'm like, don't waste your time. Like they're not in a place where they can hear that yet. And I I don't think that's where you're going to get the best
Yeah.
bang for your buck to go in our capitalist world, like you're going to keep hitting against that wall. So like over time building a relationship with somebody like that, or let's say you just are like related to them, for
Yeah.
example, right? So
Oh, yeah.
like
Funny how that works.
it's not quite a choice, but you're finding out I really like to find out like what's important to people. What are their deepest held values? And this is a way that I'm working with kind of a revamp of diversity, equity, inclusion is like, what are your company's values and what are like the lived actions that your company takes to make those values a reality for your staff as much as you're making it for your clients? So
Mm,
let's say this is an uncle who, has this deeply held value of like how important um family is. Family, so like let's explore that value and the importance
yeah.
of that and like see if we can massage it to help them understand how like, well, if you really value family and above everything else, and one of your family members is also gay, like how do you hold that of like that's maybe something you don't feel is, maybe it's a religious reason that you feel like that can't be held. So how can you hold both like this is a family member who's we love and we're related to as a part of our blood, and you're challenged by one aspect of their identity and who they are, but how do we massage this value of like tell me what goes into loving family or believing so much in this, you know this, so that we can start to apply it other places. And I think we can do this with DEI. We don't need any of those words to accomplish what we're going after. Like everyone needs a bathroom. Great. Like that is not a given. That's not given. Like people would come to my office and say, like, I feel like I'm advocating and asking for something that's really basic. And it feels like, why do I have to ask for this? And I'm like, we didn't give farm workers bathrooms. That was something they literally had to like refuse to pick fruit and say, we're not going to do our jobs till you give us a bathroom. Like, we are working on a scale of like needing to ask for every possible thing that is a basic human
Woo.
need. Because
Yeah.
our workplace is set up off of the same system that we actually set up for slavery, we are fighting at every single corner and turn for our basic human needs to be met. Because left without people speaking up for what it is that they need, we would still be in a system where nobody's needs are met and we work people until they die, which we still do, arguably, in this country.
Yep.
And yet they might still be making a wage. So, like, there's, for anyone who's like, oh, should I bring this up? Is this something that other people need? Am I just like way too, am I, do I need too much? Like, no, it's probably a basic human need that is not being met in your workplace that we need to update. And with the right conversations and building of relationships, like, and maybe an outside consultant who comes in to repeat the exact same thing that you've been said, because often I come in and I say, let's look at your surveys that your staff have told you everything you need to know. Cool. Let's make a plan based off of what your staff have told you that you need to know, and some best practices here to say, this is what we're going to do to implement the changes that your staff have been asking for. Most of the time they have the answers. And if they've never asked the staff for that input, believe me, when an outside person comes in to ask for their input, they are happy to share it with you. And then I can start collecting the data that we need to say, okay, here's where we're going. The roadmap's pretty clear on the 10 directions, like, the forks in the road we need to build and the signage we need to make and the ways that we're going to start making sure that everyone's needs are met and not just the predominant or, dominant group of people whose needs have already been met.
God, you brought up such an amazing and devastating, but also spot on assessment of the fact that our workplace has been sort of built on this idea of slavery, and that we're just kind of going from there. We're moving up from there, which is just like, and not much, like you just said, to fight for bathrooms is insane. It's like, how inhumane is that, right? So I'm curious. Obviously, slavery was found in throughout the world, but I wonder if there's any countries that, say, the US or maybe you look to as being on the forefront of being, good about inclusion. Obviously, the US is a bit of a melting pot, but there are other places in Europe that I don't know. I just feel like Scandinavia's got to have something on us, or maybe not. I don't know.
Yes, there are. I mean, this is such an interesting question here because first, like, America's flavor of diversity, equity, inclusion is very American flavored. So part of it's
How so? I want to this yeah, I can imagine.
like the constructs we're talking about, we created. So like our social categories that we're working off of are specific to the conditions of our country, right? Having imported slave labor, having created trade agreements that were really damaging, that forced immigration, from Central and South America to come to our country. Um, the ways that like our LGBTQ community has come into being. A lot of these, I mean, while many of the LGBTQ people exist everywhere by many different names, like our American flavor is like, we've got a pepperoni pizza, and the Netherlands has, like fresh baked bread with homemade butter, as their flavor of DEI. Like in some ways, ours is so specific
That
to
sounds
our
delicious.
culture of um, these racial, ethnic, religious groups, gender groups, because of because our country was founded on people getting away from one religious way of being, but then also implementing a very religious way of being, right? Very puritanical way of being here to try to distance themselves from another and create ideally a more pluralistic society, but like, under one God, like it's
There's a lot
complicated.
to unpack there. Yeah.
So
Make it
yes,
make
like it
sense.
is, it can be helpful to like look at, those maps of like where are the blue maps, like where are people experiencing the best health, where are people experiencing the best my gosh, we were just visiting a family friend in Austria, and they get 3 months off for to take care of their new children for their young. 3 months off, like
And human here it's is it 2
wow.
months or is it 1? Or is it what is
It
the
depends on your state. We don't actually have a
okay.
national law. So California, I just know this because my friends in Washington just had a baby and they get 12 weeks off. I think
Oh.
California might be 6 or 8 weeks.
Eh.
Like, you don't get you get, like, you get
Okay,
barely any
baby.
time off. Yeah, like,
Nice
please go
meeting
ahead.
you.
Nice. That was
Just
your bonding time. I mean, it's
yeah.
even new that, like, a second parent gets parental time off. Like, even in Austria, like, he still like, the father had to apply to get time off, and it wasn't the same amount that, like, the mother got of this child. And so, like, yeah, they're ahead in giving, the mom maternity leave, all this time off. I don't know what happens for trans people. I don't know, it's so much more complicated than mom and dad, but
Yeah.
he still had to apply and he got less time, but he could apply to have like part-time work for 3 months after that and still keep his job. So like there's still a better
Oh,
option
wow.
there. And like in the US, we like just got paternity leave and it doesn't always stick, and now we're trying to be like, it's not even maternity and paternity leave, it's just parental leave. And like,
Yeah.
how do we allow people just to take the time they need to like bond with their children off and not have that be a burden to all their coworkers around them so they hate them when they come back, right? Because we also do this thing in this country where we're like, this
Oh,
person's gone, you can't hire for their position, and now everyone share their workload, instead of being like, we hire a temp worker to fill, to
yeah.
fill these pieces so other people can do this work. Like we don't make it sustainable for somebody to leave their job to bring a new life into the world and become acquainted with them and,
Yeah.
help them in
Without becoming hated, or
I
way behind
know.
or yeah. I filled in I will say this, I was it was Discovery. I filled in for a friend of mine who got paternity leave for 3 months, and and it was really actually quite nice other than the fact that they told me it was only like a part-time position and it was very much a full-time position. So they paid me a lot less than they paid him. But still, they brought me in to sort of offset so, the job was shared, but still yeah, it's sad because and then at the same time they want to complain about low birth rates and it's like, well, that's a whole nother show for a whole nother
But so one
yeah.
of the main things here is like, okay, there's a federal minimum. This is what I work with a lot of
Mhm.
organizations on when it comes to like policies and benefits. And it's like, okay, so let's say in California, you can take 12 weeks of unpaid work off. You have to save that person's job for a year. how could we be more generous than that? You know, like
Right.
that's nice. That's a nice minimum. But like, how do we go beyond offering the minimum of what it is and say, like, what is it actually like? How can we actually support our employees in having
Yeah.
a sustainable amount of time off to like be with their family and bond and recover and still want to come back to work here
Yeah.
when all that's said and done?
Yeah, I mean, especially it sounds to me too like you're if the if the place is not inclusive or has a I think a I don't know, a culture that promotes belonging, right? Why would you want to rush back from having a child knowing that people don't like you, you don't feel like you belonged anyways, and then it's like, okay, well now what? It's like I've seen a lot of people decide not to go back to work in a traditional sense and do something like say more a freelance position, because at least there they can pick and choose the jobs that they get and do what they do. I do what I want, which is a shame, in some cases. But at the same time, if you're not going to play ball, you don't get to keep the good employees, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I want
Yeah.
to help people keep their good employees and make their
Oh,
workplace one that people want to come back to and want to work at. And
yeah.
there's no like hour-long chair yoga that fixes that. It's not a fix
Right.
like a program. It's not enough DEI training for all your staff that's going to help do that. It's like the really basic things around like what kind of autonomy do I have to arrange my schedule? How do I, bereavement leave and making sure
Oh
that
my
like
gosh.
should someone in my life die, like I don't have to return to work 2 days later, when
Oh,
I'm not in a place to be able to work. So, like, how do we support the well-being long term, knowing that, like, okay, that's gonna take money to support somebody who's experiencing grief, and we can afford that at the cost of, like, our employees' well-being, and
yeah.
we'll be better for it.
Exactly. So just walk me through when you get hired by, say, like an organization or a company that wants you to come in and do, sort of I mean, a consulting, would you say it's an overhaul or what do you call it? Is there a name for
Yeah, I mean, I think people
beautification?
yeah. People come in with like usually an issue they're facing or a challenge they're up against. And I say, cool, you've identified something that is coming up. Let me do an audit or like take inventory of what's going on here. So typically, when I work with a client, I say, cool, tell me all your concerns. Tell me why you want to start doing this work. Tell me the kinds of resources you have to devote to this work because beyond maybe paying me for my consulting, like you have to have money to implement initiatives. So like if you're coming into this being like, we have no money and we can't actually support anything, like then you're not actually in a place where you
Yeah.
can make long-term systemic change. So like I want you to feel confident that like you've got some budget here that you're working with. And like, let's take a look at what's going on under the hood of the car. Just like if your car is making a ticking noise and you bring it into the mechanic, they're like, there's some key places I think this could be coming from. Could be, an easy fix.
Yeah.
And there could be some other things happening under there that's making this issue show up in this way. So let me take a look. I kind of look at people's like, what's your onboarding? What's your employee handbook? What's your staff saying? What kind of climate assessments have you done? What kind of feedback have you heard? What changes have you been making? Um, Yeah, I mean, usually it's done in 2 parts, like, what's the written
Mhm.
stuff I can review that's all, either public or internal that I can better understand your inner workings, and let me talk to some people. I wanna talk to some, small focus groups. I call them empathy interviews. I'm trying to get to
Oh,
know, like, what's it like to work here? I just wanna understand what your experience of it. It might be helpful to do those in affinity spaces of, some BIPOC people, some LGBTQ people, some people who identify as navigating the workplace with a disability, some of your managers, some of your C-suite, some of your um, custodial staff, like just depends. So I'm going to do those empathy interviews and get to know like, what's your experience like? I'm going to take notes and then I'm going to build a report that I work with the organization. I report back and I say, cool, here's what I found under the hood.
yeah.
um, there's a lot of working parts. I'm going to like kind of break down the parts of what's happening here. And then I'm going to give you kind of like my recommendation based off of what I see and the funds you have. Like, let's look at how you can work with this. There's, dents you can make in each of these places and a longer term plan we can make that says none of this is happening. Some of it's happening overnight. Some of it's a really easy, like, let's just update these forms and change, she, her, she, and him to like person, like we just don't have to have a gender
Mhm.
binary on this form anymore. And some of them are a lot more complicated and ongoing. And we want to like educate staff on why it's important that we're making this change. So we need to put in some workshops to help people understand if you're going to help new patients fill out forms and your staff don't understand what the form is asking for, then you're going to run into more issues. But if your staff understand the complexity of what your patients are being asked for, then they can explain if anyone has questions as they're filling out a form on how what steps they'll take. So what kind of education do staff need to implement the changes? And then how do we check how it's going? So build some check-in points to say, whether that's a quarterly review or a step back halfway through the year and an annual one too, that says like, let's check in. What's working? What's not working? What's not going as planned? None of this is, most of it's not black and white. It's like, oh, it's complicated. These things went well about it. And we're kind of challenged by these things. So how do we update what it is we're doing to like knowing that we're facing this challenge? How do we move forward with that? So then it's a part of like, how do we park all these cars in the
Yeah.
lot?
It's like a game of Tetris. Um,
Exactly.
so, I mean, the goal is to just, I mean, I guess it varies because certain companies probably have certain things under the hood. But would you say that a lot of the goal is just a happier workforce or a more efficient? Is that, I mean, I guess that varies.
I think usually the goal is something like we want to retain our employees. We want better retention because we don't
Yeah.
because it's expensive to constantly turn over and get new employees all the time. So we're
Yeah.
working on retention, or we, keep trying to hire for we keep trying to hire for this and we keep hiring the same type of person over and over and over again. How do we get like a more diverse applicant pool? Because um, like word of mouth of one group of people is resulting in the same group of people applying for this job. So how do we diversify who would even want to be in this job? People are
Yeah.
coming with, sometimes it is like, we're running a summer fellowship and we really want like our fellows to keep engaging with us after it because they're part of our recruitment for why young people would want to work here in the future. So can you help us look at our summer program to say what else can we do to build in and make this an even better experience so that that summer internship you're hosting isn't just an internship one time done and goodbye. This is now you're building the spokespeople of the younger generation who are saying, oh yeah, like, come, you're going to want to work in this museum because look at all the cool things that I was able to accomplish while here and all the ways they were really thoughtful about my like housing and accommodations and my free time and making sure that like we had a connection and a cohort as a group and worked through conflict as it came up. Which, your summer program or your internship program can be the reason why people come work with you, and it can be the reason why people choose to run away and tell all of their friends to not
Yes.
come work with you.
Word of mouth is, it's powerful, right? That's
The reputation.
yeah. I mean, and I have folks, I know people actually, a friend of mine, I don't know if Michael is watching. Hello, Michael. Michael's one of, well, he's a friend, but he's also one of my Patreon patrons. But he works in HR and he's worked for a lot of big companies. And I'm hoping to have him on sometime. But he's told me some of the practices that, make you not want to workplaces, and that's really unfortunate that people don't listen to their employees because it's not an issue of them not speaking up. Uh, what is the most common, I guess, complaint or concern you get from employees that you talk to at small businesses?
Hmm. I think one of the most common things that comes up is people not feeling heard. Like I told somebody about this and nothing changed, and so I don't feel heard. Like not great communication or feedback methods. Like, if you're an organization that's going to ask for feedback, you have to be ready to implement it. I'm going to say that again, because if you're going to ask for feedback and you're just doing it for like to save it in a file and put it together for like a rainy day 10 years from now, don't do it. Don't ask for anyone's feedback if you don't want to do anything about it. Because the most common thing is people not feeling heard. Like, "Ooh, this is an issue. I brought it up and it's been swept under the rug, ignored. I keep getting put off. I just kind of like get pushed on to the next person." And so, how do we really create meaningful ways that feedback can be given? And how do we create C-suites or leadership that can hear feedback? And so, a lot of times I come in to help your C-suite staff say, like, great, we need a retreat, we need some downtime, we need some like weekly processing time with a consultant to say, like, what do you do when you get feedback that's hard to hear? A lot of the times people's business is their baby. It's hard to hear negative feedback when you're like, we're trying so hard. But it's like when you give feedback to a parent and they're like, I can't do anything right. Like, oh, I can't do that right. Nothing's right. Like
Right.
that starts to show up in our companies that we're working for, instead of being like, oh, wow, great. Thanks for that feedback. Here's the timeline we think we can get to this on. It's not today or tomorrow, like, let me give you some timeline on when we're going to get back to you. Let me think about, we have a process in place to process feedback like this. So I help create policies and processes that make it really clear on where feedback goes. And in fact, it would be like written into your employee handbook how we receive feedback, where it goes, what the process looks like, when you might expect to hear back, and like how we can show we're reaching to possibly meet it, or if we can't meet it, how there's been a conversation that shares like, this is the reason why you have to work to get money,
Right.
This is how this particular piece works here and we can't shift it, but like, tell me what you're actually needing is more flexibility. Like, let's figure out in your schedule how we can build that flexibility in. So still working with people on what it is they're asking for.
Yeah. God, I mean, that nothing makes you want to not speak up again, like not being heard. You know what I mean? Like that's talk about you're going to start looking very quickly. What about transparency amongst employees? Do you encourage that as well? Because sometimes we don't talk about how much we make, and especially you know, anybody that is well, I don't know. I feel like dudes talk about how much they get paid more than, I know that my science communicator lady and non-binary friends, we don't talk about it as much. And that we're starting to more because we're realizing, oh, we've been making a lot less.
Good. Yes.
Yeah.
Anything we can do to increase transparency is so powerful. And that's not like overnight. We just publish how much everybody makes, which a lot of
Mhm.
companies are afraid to do, like a like a pay equity audit, which I also do with organizations, to say, let's look
That's
under the
cool.
hood at what's happening here. Let's just
Yeah.
see how pay is divided. And then let's look at like, how do we create pay bands and think about transparency as to like, if somebody wants a raise, what's the steps they would go through to start applying for it? How do we create transparency and what it means to
Yeah.
like know what you'd be making in different sectors or areas? Some of that's really transparent, like if you work for the government or a state school, so you can see some of that. But if you're working at any private organization, it's not known. And yeah, pay inequity is just rampant.
Yeah,
um,
I can imagine. It's bad.
so
I do. I'm sorry. I have a question.
yeah.
My unfinished journey says, I recently heard someone talk about the finish line, what the finish line should look like. How can one
Mm.
go about explaining that we fight a long war?
Mm.
That's a
Such a
tough
good
one. Yeah,
point.
it
I
is.
mean, this is
It's
something that comes up in DEI because people ask me like, when will it all be done? Like, when would you ever just be like happy with how things are? I was like, first of all, I love RBG's answer to that. She used to say, when the Supreme Court's all women, that's when I'll be happy. Um,
No, I used to do science panels, and I did a science panel that was all women once, and my friend said, "Oh," kind of gave it a hard time, like, "Where are the men?" And I was like, you know what I mean? Like, I've got how many all male panels have I watched for 20 something years? You know what I mean? Like, because he was like, "What do we call it? Is it a wannel?" And I was like, "No, it's just a panel, you dummy." You know what I mean? I got so mad. But anyways, yes.
so this idea that there's like some utopia or endpoint, like that doesn't exist. So a lot of the work I do with organizations is like, how do we do this work in a sustainable way? Because if you are always training for a marathon, like you're going to get tired and you're not going to want to keep going because you can't live at marathon training pace 24/7. So like,
This is true. I can't
how
even do it for one day.
no, me neither.
No.
So like,
Yeah.
how can I help you do this in a way that it's like the self-watering system we're hooking up for your yard, where like, yeah, some things are just going to go because they're built in to the foundations of how you work. You don't have to think about watering the plants twice a day or in the morning and at night. You just are functioning this way because we've built your policies and systems to be more equitable and to center our most marginalized and to think about how we're taking care of our employees. So we've built it into the foundation of how you're working so that but that doesn't mean you never replace your hoses. That means that like, yeah, like something's still going to come through and eat something up or dig something up or mess something up. So like there's always going to be hopefully little things that you need to replace and update and change because language does not stay the same. We keep moving and changing. So how do we create within your workflow a place that you just naturally do that? Annually we look over these things and review them and we update them so that we're not like 5 years out of date with we don't have the COVID policy that includes you wear gloves to work because we learned like you don't need to wear gloves to work if you have COVID. Like, how do we make sure we're
Yeah.
updating things in a timely manner and it doesn't feel like a barrage of, an avalanche of new things? It's like we just know new things are coming to us and we have a system in place for how we're going to update, change, learn about, hire someone to help us implement that. Just like any business, there's no like set it and forget it. There's aspects of your business you can set it and forget, but it's a constant tending to. And so how do we allow this work to be something that like we can constantly tend to? And I like to remind folks that like if we're not having fun and we're not building joy and we're not building play into what it is we do, we're not going to want to do it much longer. If it all feels like
Yep.
a chore and a slog and one thing on top of everything else we have to do, we're not going to do it. So how do we make it something that's like fun and rewarding and fulfilling? And we get to celebrate and see the outcomes. And we find ways that like, we don't just celebrate people the way we want to celebrate them. We ask them how they want to be celebrated. Not everyone wants like a public party thrown on their behalf, even
Yeah.
for their birthday. So like that's one of the basic things you can ask when somebody's new in their role. Like, how do you want to be celebrated? Publicly, privately? Like here's actually an option. We're not going to ask for public or private celebrations on their intake form, but we're going to ask like, what actually makes you feel celebrated? And is it an email to everyone with your picture and confetti? Or is it a party on the floor that we work on? Or is it just like a conversation with me and going out for coffee and like letting you know that like I'm really appreciative of all the work you put into this really big event that we put on that produces this thing. I don't actually want a party with
Right.
cupcakes and 20 people at it. So again, like how do we make it fun, build celebration into it, build joy into it? And ideally you're doing that for all of your projects that you're working on. And that's why people are motivated to like do their jobs because they get to see the outcome that your clients are facing of like when they finally get access to what it is they need and you're getting to celebrate, the great things that your company accomplished over the course of a year. And so, yeah, there's just how do we keep generating momentum for
Yeah.
this to not stall out and for it to be slow going or fast. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's fast, sometimes we're on a downhill and we're like, wind in our hair, music up, things are going so well, coasting. Another time, when you can be coasting and you can hit a really big rock, and,
Yeah.
and it can throw you off. And now we're not back at square one. So even with what we're doing right now, like, yeah, we're getting really thrown off. We're up against a boulder, and like there are broken arms and legs involved in what's happening right now. But it doesn't mean we haven't done everything we've already done. So there's so much that we're building off of. There's so much wisdom, there's so much work, there's so much precedent, um,
Yeah.
that I really feel like we don't have to be like, all of that was for nothing. It's like all of
Mhm.
this has raised the awareness of so many people. Thank goodness we're learning. Like there are so many Jews advocating for Palestinian well-being and to end this genocide. And like, thank goodness,
Yeah.
because we need more and more voices who are willing to stand up and say, this is wrong and we need to take care of human beings, right? And I
Absolutely.
I'm hopeful that like amidst this time when we're realizing like the doesn't have our back. I mean, did the government
Whew.
ever really have our back? But some might argue there were ways that we've been able to advocate for the government to have our back, to have that self-watering sprinkler system. And now we're like, okay, they dug up all the pipes and they're cutting off the water. And we're gonna have to figure out how do we support each other through this and find the people who want to work to make sure that like, yeah, women are paid for their jobs and like
Yeah.
everyone can get a job and keep a job. And that, yeah, we're going to advocate that people aren't put in work camps, and we're not going to put people, like how are we really going to stop the damaging things of like what's happening right now? We're not going to stand for allowing immigrants to be detained in the ways that they're being detained. We're not going to stand for not letting inmates get the hormone replacement therapy they need and be put into the um, jails or prisons that align with their gender identity. Like
Oh
we
my God.
cannot,
Mm.
we cannot. So
Yeah.
you, I, everyone, like we're opening our eyes and we are working towards this in a way that's like we have to take breaks. You have to have time off. You cannot be going at 100 miles an hour. Really, like when you're off, I'm on. When I'm on, we have to have enough people working on this that it's like we we're all in it and we can take breaks from it because yeah, we can't live at firefighting pace.
Yeah. It's a
Um,
marathon, not a sprint.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, and I think you mean you brought it's so funny. I brought this up in a show a couple weeks ago where I wish that my brain could like take notes because like you bring up a great thing and I'm like I write it down in my brain, then I let it scratch out of it another thing. You said so many amazing things in what you just that wonderful monologue because I was like, "Oh my god, there's so much gold in there," especially just this idea of even taking what you know and bringing that to activism, and organization in terms of getting people out in the streets and I do feel like and I have had conversations about this too about like what's going on in the administration and is very it's a great tactic, if you cut people off at the knees, if they're undereducated, underfed, underworked, underemployed, insured, all the things, if they're sick, they can't resist, they can't fight, unless they have nothing to lose and they're unhoused. And it's, and even then it's like, you're just fighting to just survive. And so it is a time in which we have to take care of each other and check in on each other. I mean, have you been able to use your training in DEI to work with any sort of, I guess, sort of activist groups, or is that, I mean, you've got so much on your plate already, so I wouldn't be surprised if you, there's not enough time, but I wasn't sure if you, or if maybe you have some any advice for activist groups that are like, oh, this is wonderful. How can we stay on top of things?
yeah. I mean, the activists. Okay, couple answers to that.
Yeah.
One is I love working with activist groups because even if we're working for a cause we really care about, sometimes we're not taking care of our employees in that same way. So any way we
Hmm.
can like set up activist groups with kind of some of those internal structures so you don't have to think about it, but it's built into your foundations. Love doing that work. Um, And then groups that I get involved in, I definitely love to like volunteer my services in areas where like I care deeply about a cause and I might not have money to give them right now, but I can do some consulting for them or support them in, updating, redoing, how can I take a look at this and make changes to it for you kind of ways. I've been involved with our Tongva Parashat land back group and
Oh,
um,
cool.
happy to share their information. So I
Yes.
donate to them, but along with that, they were like, we really need to help like building our database. So me and a fellow friend like are helping them build their database of organizations and anyone who like publicly states that they support, they have like some sort of land acknowledgement statement. And then the dream is that we follow up with all those organizations and say, we love you, have a land acknowledgement statement. Did you know there's a place you could give money to support the actual giving back of land to Tongva people? Um, we want to help you do that. That's something we're building in LA right now. It's a lot bigger in the
That's
Bay. There's
great.
more well-known organizations, but it's being built in Los Angeles now. So yeah, how do we help an organization we care about with whatever expertise we have? We're not everyone is interested in being out on the streets and holding a sign. That is something that anyone can do, but if your activism isn't that, there's so many ways that like if you're passionate about prison reform or education reform, like start looking for the nonprofits and the organizations that like, how can you volunteer for them? How can you support them in their efforts? Um, if you can give money, if you can give time, if you can give expertise, there's so many ways that we can be in solidarity and working together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like we the way you and I met is through, a group that is not necessarily an activist group, but they definitely, I feel like, I don't know, empowerment and heels. We both do burlesque, draglesque with empowerment and heels. And shout out to Miss Marquez and Jackie and all the gang if you are watching. But it's such a great example of joy is not, joy is part of the resistance, right? That, and especially queer joy. and and just this idea that the motto, community over competition, and really pushing this idea of community and banding together in times of great sorrow. I mean, it's it's a wonderful community, and I think that that's a great example of how we can just stay positive through so many hardships.
And they're doing something you love. Like, who knew when I looked up and found that class, I was looking for like body positive dance classes, just a dance class that like wasn't going to tell me I had to be freaking skinny and fit to do it, because you would be
Yeah.
surprised how many dance classes are about like, you're in this to look better. And I was like, I'm not in it to
Uh,
look better. I just want
yeah.
to flaunt what I've got. I just want to look how I
Yes.
look and like feel really good in it. So finding an instructor who is like body positive led me to Miss Marquez, which led me to this incredible community of like uplifting, loving, body positive, or just body expressive humans who want to play in this world and be activists with our art and, share our bodies and share the way that we work for ones, for the money, but
Yes.
also with each other. I mean, you teach while you dance. Like you are giving an entire lesson on like how how mammals or bugs or insects work, on like the hilarity of our relationship to this animal ways of being. Like it's incredible what you get to do with art. So like that's activism. Like I want people to tap into like what something as it could be your cooking as activism, your gardening as
Yes.
activism, your skateboarding as activism, your walking as activism. Like what's the thing that makes you come alive and tick and like find ways to express yourself within that and find communities that are doing it in a way. Because yes, there's like a standard cooking community, and there's people who want to like cook sustainably and with resources that are local and with by all different ethnicities and learn, or you can
Yeah.
be like, there's some of everything, so you do
Taking
have
your
to look.
clothes off for money. No, but I have to give a
It's
shout
an
out to
option.
your routine, which was in March, which was amazing, where you kind of did this great sort of really skewering gender norms and throwing it on its head. And what was the inspiration for your routine? Because you did a voiceover that it was so great and just really kind of setting up like this like Susie homemaker, and was just like in the middle just said, nah, screw this shit, I'm doing what I want.
Yeah, it went, I was really inspired by the Trad Wives of America, and
Ah!
this whole movement that's like, return to this feminine way of being where you take care of everything and you have no financial stability because you just rely on your husband to take care of things. And then my trad wife kind of had this realization after this monologue
Yeah.
of how amazing her life is, which in so many ways it is. Like, I'm going to make things from scratch and I'm going to, go garden and harvest things and save them and have time to take care of my kids. Like all of these things that, like, yes, I want to celebrate those things, but not at the expense of your human rights, not at the expense of like, you can't hold a job. You don't aren't allowed to have a credit card. Like you can make that choice if you don't want to have a credit card and you
Yeah.
don't want to have a job and you want your husband to make the money. But if we're going to create a world where like that's the norm or we're legislating that, that's where I get really afraid. So I built this trad wife character who is loving her life. And then by the end of it, felt pretty overwhelmed by like all the work that she was doing and the fact that she'd given up, her ability to make money or contribute to the world and like ways that monetize it. And yeah, then she just got to take off her apron and dress and live in her queer joy,
I-
non-binary
Yes.
glory.
Yes.
To Lady Gaga's what was the Lady Gaga song? Now I can't
Wait, did you
remember.
abracadabra? You did do
Yes,
abracadabra, right? Yes.
abracadabra. It was
I
kind of like,
love that.
here's the magic
Ooh,
trip. We are like
yes.
taking off these norms
Yes.
and we are going into like what queer joy means and to be like fat and flaunt it. And yeah,
Absolutely
it was
fabulous,
such a
gorgeous self.
joy to play
Yes.
with.
Oh, it
Thank
was so
you.
good. Oh my goodness. I can't wait to see what else you come up with because it is just, isn't it so much fun? It's just a great,
So much fun.
right?
Oh my gosh, I'm so inspired. And the community of people, like
Oh,
getting to show up to an open mic night of burlesque
right?
dancers is so inspiring when I can stay up that late.
I know. I feel I haven't been in a little bit, and part of it is because of just, hitting a wall at it's 10 p.m. It's time to go. It's time for the night sleep.
Like
Yeah,
9
I can't.
o'clock has been bedtime lately. I'm like, I don't
Oh,
know how I'm ever gonna make it back to an 11 o'clock event.
I know. I'm gonna have to just sort of like wean my, like, just stay up like 10 minutes later each night,
That's right. It's
That's
possible. It's
we can
totally
do this. We
possible.
got this.
Find a friend, we'll motivate each other, we'll text each other, we'll agree to stay up late that night, we'll hydrate.
Exactly. We'll check in, we'll hydrate, lots of water, electrolytes.
Yes.
We got a plan. We got a plan. What's your cat's name again? Your cat's gonna have to also
I
it's
know.
it's
Tiger
gonna
lad. He did not
Tiger
make an
Lad. Tiger Lad's
appearance.
gonna stay on ya. Raisin's gonna stay on me. I don't know where she
Yes.
went. She's off tooting around or something. Oh my goodness. This has been so much fun. Seriously.
Thank
Oh
you so
God.
much.
No, I'm really I gotta say, I brought it up earlier. You're like your ability to just make I know I was feeling at ease, when you were just telling me about like really listen and really just, again, that sort of radical empathy. But like you did bring up a good point, at a certain point, if somebody is not willing to listen to you, listen to them, it's like, walk away, and I feel like we do that a lot too with it comes to online stuff. I'm happy to engage with somebody if I feel like they're listening. And I actually have had, there was a video that went up recently about the Smithsonian and getting, trying to basically whitewash the history of, the African American Museum. And it was pretty terrible, but it was one of the things they said was just, "Oh yeah, go up against this idea that race is biological." We scientists know that race is not. There's no biological basis to racial classifications, and that was said in the video. And somebody was like, "Wait a minute, what do you mean there's no biology to race?" And I explained in my biological anthropology way that, that you cannot draw a line between the groups commonly referred to as races. It's, you can find morphological similarities, but it's much more complicated. And there's very little genetic diversity within our own species compared to, say, something like chimpanzees. And instead of fighting with me, instead of calling me an idiot or insulting the way I look, which is usually what happens online, um, they said, "Wow, I learned something. Thank you." And I all about died. I was like, "What?" I was, when you like go to look at a comment and what they replied, and I'm ready. I'm like ready to fight. I'm like got my gloves on and I'm ready to go. And they just said, "Thank you." And then a few other people had follow-up questions, and then they said, "Thank you." And I was like, "What is happening?" And that's what gives me hope. But when somebody is just trolling you, to just walk away. And hold on one second. We've got, okay. So My Unfinished Journey says, "Hail Natalia and Erin-Kate, and hail the long fight for justice." Oh, okay. And Greg M. Oh, it's Greg. It's MC Greggy, I believe. Is this MC Greggy? I hope. Come out June 5th. It's Twyla's birthday that week. Oh, wait, no, that's Peter. Wait, no. Greg said that. Sorry. This is old Natalia figuring out who's writing what, because at a certain point I realize I'm older and it's all confusing, this technology. But yes, yeah, Twyla is having a birthday, I believe at Shoo Shoo Baby. I believe on June 5th. This is for folks in Los Angeles. Go support my friend Twyla Noir at Shoo Shoo Baby on June 5th. Also, Miss Marquez, I believe, is dancing. It's going to be a wild, good time. And I hope to be back. I'm going out of town the week preceding that. But anyways, I do want to ask you a couple of last questions, and then I'm going to let you go be a brilliant, fabulous human for the rest of your day, because that's what you are, EK. I'm so happy we're having this conversation. I just think you're awesome. One thing, and I feel like the right has done this, and maybe I don't know if you have an opinion on this, like, taking words like woke or DEI or even BLM or all lives matter, like just hijacking these terms and phrases and giving them a whole new definition. Is there any, and like, that's what you said, the verbiage is going to keep changing because we got to keep escaping this weird hijacking process. Is there another word or term or phrase that you're seeing maybe wading into that territory where they're like starting to use something else that you use in a way that's like, "No, God, that's not what we mean"?
Um, I worry about the fact that what do we like truth, or like there's not real facts, or like like
Facts is a
fake
good one.
news. Like
Yes.
we're taking away like really common words we use, and like there's no, I don't like truth social media. Isn't that what Trump's calling his social media? Like, I'm so scared for the 1984 effect of like
Yeah.
something means the exact opposite of what that something used to mean and says. But it takes a little bit time for everyone to catch up with that. And so the like, any word that we take that we're just like flipping it on its head to mean the exact opposite.
It's
I
scary. Yeah.
Yeah, I like want to create space to like grieve the change. Like I'm like, we need a little like word cemetery. Like I'm like
Yeah.
I want to be like a little Dia de los Muertos about it, like honor what they brought to us and like
Yeah.
allow them to lay at rest and say like, that's okay. There's other ways to say that, like, even, you know, woke, like there's different ways to say like we're alive to what's happening right now. We are awakening to what's happening in this moment. And so we're going to treat it differently than how we always have. Yeah. And I think there'll be new catchphrases thanks to social media, thanks to hashtags, thanks to like new technology,
Ugh.
thanks to, I bet ChatGPT would come up with some good new phrases.
If they try to make fetch a thing, I'm gonna laugh. If they really try to, they just mean girls the
ChatGPT
crap out of
brings
us.
fetch
Yeah.
back.
Oh,
Yes.
dear Lord. Oh, that would be good. I don't ChatGPT I'm like the old person that's like terrified of the ChatGPT. I've used it a little bit, mostly for fun, but I'm like, I don't know. And then I know I have a lot of friends. I was a professor. I taught biological anthropology, and a lot of my professor friends have to stay on it to make sure that they're not using it to, right answers. Although I was one of those professors that I had open book, open notes, open internet tests. Because I was
Right.
like, look, I don't know the cranial capacity of Paranthropus boisei off the top of my head. I have to look it up every time because my brain, I gotta, I know a lot about it off the top of my head, but that's one thing I don't. So, but the cool thing is, well, not cool. They would still fail sometimes. So, but because you have to, because the cool thing is if you show up in class, you know what to look for, right? You know what to put in the computer. So it bummed me out because like some of my students did great, but some of them would like not know because they didn't come to the class and they wouldn't know how to like properly, or they'd get fooled by the not trick, but like the somewhat trick. Anyways, point being,
So, like, you had to show up and learn something to answer this question. You're not just gonna
yeah.
know it off the top of your head. Which,
No,
like, can I just
no.
say that's, like, a really inclusive way to, like, build a classroom where you're like, you have access to all the knowledge at your fingertips.
Yeah.
How do we do this? Like, our students are gonna have access to AI at their fingertips, so how do we help them be critical thinkers about, like, figuring out how they ask AI a question and determining like what's an actual fact, again, what's real, how do you have a credible source of where they
Yeah.
found that, and if it's sourcing it from a particular website that's not fact based, like let's go down that rabbit hole. Like the same thing we used to do with the internet. We used to be like, you're never going to have a calculator in your pocket, and you're like, literally we walk around with
Actually,
calculators in our
I've
pockets,
got
so like
this is it's a Texas instrument. That's what this
yeah,
thing is.
exactly. It's a
Oh my
very
God.
expensive Texas instrument. So, like,
Very
how do
expensive.
we help people know how to navigate it and use it for good, and question it and, navigate how do we offset the terrible, emissions and the amount of water and cooling
Ooh,
stations and things like that it's going to take to run this, instead of being like, let's just ignore that part of it and use it without thinking about the resources, like, oh, let's figure out how are we going to, if this is going to be an important part of our lives, like how are we going to care for people who live near cooling centers for our data.
yeah, yeah. And what are the long-term effects of living near something like that? I mean, that's oh yeah, yeah. I mean, who knows? I don't. Yeah. Um, I feel like you've covered this already. What helps you stay hopeful about the future?
Ah, um doing things I love, feeding my soul amidst the chaos. That's the most important part. Dancing, being out in nature, painting. I'm learning how to sew.
Oh,
My favorite part about like being a consultant is getting to make my own schedule. So like, yeah, I really like enjoying those things. Even trying to enjoy them as a consultant who's like, struggling and needs work, in a world where like a
yeah.
lot of people are not hiring for this. I could be in a deep state of like, uh, I don't know, giving up, but instead I'm like, we're gonna ebb and flow and we're gonna figure this out and we're gonna really nourish ourselves while we're doing it. So like this morning I went and painted for 2 hours in the garden, to like
What?
soothe my soul. And then I have capacity to show up and do my bookkeeping and come to an interview and like feel nourished as we navigate the challenges ahead. Because if you're can't pour from an empty cup, so I want people to keep doing the things that fill their cups so that you can plug in and care and have empathy and not be living at the like fractured state of like anything that happens right now could break me, because
Yeah.
again, we're in it for a long time. I did not get into the business of moving from the Palestinian Israeli conflict to solving for racism and sexism and homophobia and ableism, like none of those are going to go away, but we can navigate this world as like a more whole human being while facing those things instead of living as zombies. So I want to help people
Yeah.
out of zombie land and into like your wholeness, so that I'm not the only one advocating. People have the capacity to advocate for themselves and they have the tools to be able to do that. And then we work with the companies to be like, we know how to say yes to that.
Yeah. And that's so
Yeah.
important. And you brought up, I mean, I could ask you a million questions about your time in the Middle East. I had no idea. That is fascinating that I mean, how long were you you were in Jordan, Lebanon, and in Palestine
I
or
only
somewhere?
lasted a few months. I lasted like
That's
4 months on
okay.
my journey.
I have
Yeah,
never
but
been, and I would love to go one day. And but I mean, it's really admirable. And I'm not surprised that you did that work or wanted to do that work before you're doing this work, because this is it's equally, I think, as important to make sure that you are helping create a culture that can help do the work to help them, right? And that's because I mean it is absolutely heartbreaking. I've about a month ago, or a little bit over a month ago, I interviewed my friend who just spent 6 weeks in Gaza as a
Mm.
ER physician, and it's yeah, yeah. No, but and she wrote an article for the New Yorker. No, yes, the New Yorker, that came out a day before the ceasefire ended. And it was, yeah. So I mean, but it's, again, it takes all types to make this work, and I love that you're at the core. It's like you're a conflict, you mediator, resolver. That's what you want to do. Is you want to find this happy common ground, and I love that about you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my God. And I feel like you just have such a natural therapist way about you that whoever's working with you is very lucky. Hire EK. That's all I'm going to say. Because you're the best. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I usually ask people, I mean, this is technically, it's the show's called Survival of the Filthiest. So that's why I asked this. What's the filthiest thing you've done in the name of, I usually say science, but in the name of DEI? Now, this doesn't have to be filthy, and whatever you deem filthy.
I mean, I'd say my Draglesque act is pretty filthy.
Yes.
Say, stripping off your clothes to make a point about the fuckery of gender and our roles and what it all looks like. That feels
Oh,
like a deliciously filthy thing, and enjoying just having money thrown at you and rolling around with it on the floor. Like,
more, please. We need more. Oh
yes,
my
yes,
God.
we need more.
It
That
was
feels
perfect.
delicious.
Folks, I saw it. It was perfection. Yeah, you killed, slayed, left everybody just, mesmerized. So, and
Thank
learning
you.
something too. See, this is the thing.
You're an
Well,
inspiration. You're an inspiration.
ah,
I'm so glad to be in your presence and so honored that
oh,
our backstage, like changing tights and putting pasties on, resulted
yes.
in being like, what do you do? What do you do? What if we could hang out? Oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna glue pull this pasty off and put this
Yeah,
bra
exactly.
on
Are my
and
pasties, are they level? What's going on? Yeah, no, and then, yeah, come on my show, talk about DEI. I would love that. Wait, hold on. Can you help me with this garter belt? Because I don't know how to put this damn thing on. No, it's literally this, folks. This is how the magic happens, right here. That
yeah,
I love our
yeah.
friendship. This I know.
Amazing. Thank you so
Let's hang out
much.
more in real life. When
Yes.
we'll stay up late. We'll set an alarm. We'll take naps.
Aspirational goals. I love it. I'm all for it.
I
And the incremental changes and shifts. We got this. We
We
got this.
got this. We can mess with our circadian rhythm. My
Anytime.
goodness. Well,
Talk
thank
about a
you.
filthy thing to do, messing with your circadian rhythm.
Yeah. Well, I'm here to help. And, between Tiger Lad and Raisin, I think they also can help us mess with our
Yeah,
circadian rhythms to the cows come home, or the clothes come off. Whatever happens first. Well, I
from the
want to
beach.
thank you, Erin-Kate Escobar, aka EK, for all that you do to build
Thank
and
you.
promote an inclusive, healthy, safe, and efficient workspace for
Thanks.
everyone, because that's what we need. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Mwah.
Thanks for having me.
Um, Thank you. And I want to thank my wonderful producer, Peter de Tucker, who is in the Netherlands. I lekker that. That's my one Dutch word. And I want to just remind folks to please like, subscribe, and comment if you enjoyed this, and ask questions, because I know EK outside of this chat room, and I can ask them those questions when I see them backstage at a show. And if you want to support the production of Survival of the Filthiest and my other SciComm projects, you can please become a Patreon subscriber. It would mean the world to me, and you'll get all the weird, behind the scenes stuff. So, and I want to thank my Patreon patrons for doing the voodoo that you do so well. Okay, first up, we got Daniel Wynn, Claude Allen, Tom, simply Tom, Skullbeard, Tori Yates Orr, Redding Maley, Dana Logan, Michael Z. Weinstock, David Leitner, James Hudspeth, Anthony Zana, Tom Berman, Jen Beverstock, Scott Froschauer, JSB, Jeff Cohen, Andrea Bloom, Jonathan Marks, Kelly Frazier, and Michael Clanton. Thank you so much for doing all that you do and making this show possible. We're trying to turn it into a podcast and clip up the show, so there'll be more things for you to watch afterwards. Now, for next week, I don't have a guest yet because I'm a little slow this week. So we're gonna get that. I'll get it out there as soon as possible. It'll be either next Tuesday or Wednesday. And in the meantime, folks, you know what to do. You know what to do. You need to stay filthy, be healthy, and tune in next week. I love you. I love you so much.